The scent of regret was a permanent stain on Isabella's memory. It was the smell of her life ending 3 years ago. Now it was the smell clinging to the parchment in her hands. The letter had arrived at her cramped city apartment, a stark contrast to the sprawling, wild estate she'd once called home. It was not signed, but the paper was heavy, expensive, and carried the faint, unmistakable scent of pine and iron, the scent of the Silvermane pack. The scent of him. Healer, it began, a title she hadn't heard in years. The pack is dying. A blight we call the crimson bloom withers our wolves from the inside out. Our physicians are useless. You are the only one who might know the cure. We beg you. Return to Stonehaven. Her hands trembled, the paper crinkling in her grip as the words blurred before her eyes. Stonehaven. The name alone was a ghost, reaching out of the past to wrap its cold fingers around her throat. She could see it, the great stone manor perched on the cliffside, the ancient pines that whispered secrets in the wind, the training grounds where she'd first watched Kael, the future alpha, move with a predator's grace that had stolen her breath. His face, all sharp angles and stormy gray eyes, flashed in her mind. She saw him as he was that final, terrible night, standing rigid before the assembled pack, his jaw set like granite. She saw the cold dismissal in his eyes, the way his voice, usually a low rumble that warmed her from the inside out, had turned to ice as he publicly stripped her of her position as head healer. The accusations, false and cunningly planted by his new politically advantageous mate Seraphina, had hung in the air like poison. Incompetence. Endangering the pack. Her tinctures weakened our warriors. He had not looked at her not once as he pronounced her exile. He had chosen his pack, his duty, and Seraphina over her. Over the whispered promises they'd exchanged in the moon-dappled forest, over the bond that had felt as ancient and unbreakable as the mountains themselves. A bitter, acrid taste filled her mouth. She had packed her life into a single duffel bag, her heart a shattered, bleeding thing in her chest. She had driven until the mountains were just a memory in her rearview mirror, until the air no longer carried the scent of pine and betrayal. She had built a new life here, a quiet one, tending to mundane human ailments in a small clinic. It was a pale, bloodless imitation of her old purpose, but it was safe. It didn't hurt. And now this. A plea. Summons. You are the only one. The arrogance of it was breathtaking. They had cast her out, vilified her, and now, in their desperation, they expected her to come running back? To walk back into the viper's nest of pack politics, to face Kael and his venomous mate, to subject herself to the scorn of the wolves who had watched her fall? Isabelle's fist clenched, crushing the expensive parchment into a tight ball. She should throw it in the trash. He should burn it. She should forget it ever arrived. But the healer in her, the part of her soul she could never truly exile, stirred. A blight, withering our wolves from the inside out. Her mind, trained for years in the complex anatomy and physiology of werewolves, began to work despite her fury. A sickness that resisted their physicians. What were the symptoms? What was the progression? A crimson bloom. The name was unfamiliar, ominous. It sounded like a blood poisoning, a systemic necrosis. She thought of the pack's children, the playful pups who had once followed her through the gardens. She thought of the elderly who had shared their wisdom with her. Were they suffering? Were they dying? A cold knot of dread tightened in her stomach. This was Seraphina's doing. It had to be. The woman had always been jealous of Isabelle's bond with Kael, of her respected position. She had orchestrated Isabelle's fall with the precision of a master tactician. What new game was this? Was the sickness even real? Or was it a ruse to lure her back and finish the job? The door to her small bedroom opened and her roommate, Chloe, emerged, yawning. Hey, you're up early. Everything okay? Her cheerful human normalcy was a stark contrast to the supernatural turmoil raging inside Isabelle. Isabelle quickly smoothed the letter on her thigh, forcing a smile that felt like a crack in porcelain. Fine. Just a letter from back home. Chloe, ever perceptive, frowned. You look like you've seen a ghost. Bad news. The worst kind, Isabelle murmured, her gaze drifting back to the window, to the city skyline that suddenly felt flimsy and transient. A summons. A summons? Like a court summons? What for? Not a court, Isabelle said, her voice distant. A pack. Chloe's eyes widened. She was one of the few people who knew the truth about Isabelle's past. Your old pack? The one with the, she mimed claws. After everything they did to you? You're not actually thinking of going, are you? Tell me you're not that stupid, Isabelle stared at the crumpled parchment, at the words that seemed to bleed through the wrinkles. We beg you. The words were so foreign, so utterly devoid of the pride and arrogance that defined the Silvermane pack. Their very existence on the page spoke of a genuine, profound desperation. They're sick, Chloe. Dying. They say I'm the only one who can help. So what? Chloe crossed her arms, her expression fierce with protective loyalty. They didn't want your help when they threw you out. They don't get to call you back now that it's convenient. You don't owe them anything. I know. Isabelle's voice was quiet, but a steely resolve was beginning to form beneath the pain. I don't owe them anything. But I took an oath a long time ago. To heal. To preserve life. That oath wasn't just to the pack. It was to myself. This is a trap. Has to be. That bitch, what's her name? Seraphina. This reeks of her. I know that too. Isabelle finally stood, her movements slow and deliberate. She walked to the window, placing her palm against the cool glass. But what if it's not? What if they are truly dying? Could I live with myself safe in this city, knowing I could have done something and chose not to? Knowing that my pride cost lives. It's not pride, it's self-preservation. Chloe argued, her voice rising with worry. Isabelle turned, and for the first time since opening the letter, her eyes were clear, her expression settled. The internal war was over. The healer had won. I have to see it with my own eyes, she said, her voice firmer now. I need to know if it's real. And if it is, I need to know if I can finally put the past to rest by facing it. Chloe's shoulders slumped in defeat. She knew that look. It was the same look Isabelle got when a difficult case came into the clinic. A stubborn, unshakable determination. How long will you be gone? Isabelle's gaze was already far away, traveling the miles back to the mountains, back to Stonehaven, back to Kael. I don't know, she whispered. But I'm not coming back until I have my answers. The drive was a 6-hour-long descent into a past she had tried to bury. Each mile marker was a hammer blow to the fragile piece she'd constructed. The crooked oak where Kael had first kissed her. The rusted bridge over Raven's Creek where they'd skipped stones and whispered dreams. The weathered sign for Maggie's Diner, where stolen Sunday mornings had been spent tangled in a vinyl booth, sharing pancakes and secrets. Every landmark was a ghost, and by the time the dense city sprawl had thinned into the looming shadows of the Crimson Peak forests, Isabelle felt raw, flayed open, her nerves exposed to the chilling mountain air. She crossed the invisible boundary into Silvermane territory, and the change was immediate and oppressive. The very atmosphere thickened, heavy with the latent power of the pack and the weight of 1,000 watching eyes. The bond she had thought long severed, the faint, frayed connection to the land and its wolves, tugged at a place deep beneath her breastbone, a dull, persistent ache. The town of Stonehaven hadn't changed. The same weathered, proud storefronts lined the main street. But as her modest sedan crawled through the center of town, the silence was deafening. Curtains twitched. Faces appeared in windows, their expressions a toxic mix of recognition, scorn, and a new, unsettling emotion she couldn't quite place. Desperation. They knew her. They knew what she had been to their alpha, and they knew the disgrace with which she had been cast out. Now they watched the exiled healer return, their judgment a palpable force. She kept her eyes fixed ahead, her jaw clenched so tight it ached, and followed the winding road up to the cliffside estate. The Silvermane Manor rose from the mist like a Gothic fortress, all sharp gables and dark stone, a monument to power and permanence. It was a stark, brutal contrast to her cozy apartment. Cars were parked haphazardly along the long driveway, but they weren't the gleaming, expensive vehicles of a celebration. They were dusty, practical trucks and SUVs, their presence speaking of a community gathered not for a feast but for a vigil. Isabelle parked at the far edge of the gravel lot, the stones crunching like bones under her tires. She killed the engine and sat for a long moment, her hands gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. Her reflection in the rearview mirror was a stranger, pale with dark circles under her brown eyes, her hair a messy knot. The faded scar along her collarbone, the one Kael's blood had sealed 7 years ago, seemed to pulse beneath the neckline of her sweater. She looked tired. She looked broken. Good, she thought, a bitter twist to her lips. Let him see what he did. Steeling herself, she slipped out of the car, avoiding the main entrance. She knew every hidden path, every forgotten servant's door. She moved like a ghost through the corridors, the familiar scents of beeswax, old wood, and wolf threatening to suffocate her. The air itself was wrong. Beneath the familiar smells was a new, cloying sweetness, like rotting roses and spoiled honey. The crimson bloom. She followed the sound of muffled voices and the scent of sickness to the great hole, which had been converted into a makeshift infirmary. The sight that greeted her stole the breath from her lungs. Dozens of pack members lay on cots and pallets, their skin waxy and pale. But it was the markings that were horrifying. Across their arms, chests, and faces, intricate vein-like patterns of a deep bloody crimson spread beneath their skin, pulsing with a faint, sickly light. It was beautiful and grotesque, a floral necrosis blooming from within. The air hummed with a low, collective moan of pain, and the sweet, putrid scent was overwhelming. Her healer's mind immediately began cataloging symptoms, even as her heart recoiled. Systemic infection. Vascular corruption. High fever evidenced by the sheen of sweat on every brow. No one noticed her at first. All attention was focused on a cot near the massive stone fireplace. And there, standing over it, was Kael. He was taller, if that was possible, his shoulders broader, but the weight on them was now a visible, crushing thing. His dark hair was unruly, as if he'd been running his hands through it for days. The power radiated from him, but it was a strained, desperate energy. He was holding the hand of a young boy, no more than 10, whose small body was marred by the advanced, pulsing crimson patterns. The boy was trembling violently, his breaths coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Isabelle's resolve hardened, crystallizing from shaky determination into cold, professional focus. The personal could wait. The patient could not. She stepped out of the shadows and into the lantern light. His lungs are filling with fluid, she said, her voice cutting through the low din of suffering. You need to sit him up. Now. The room fell into a stunned silence. Every head turned. Whispers rippled through the pack like a shockwave. The exile. Isabelle. The traitor healer. Kael's head snapped up. His storm-gray eyes, those eyes that had haunted her dreams for 3 years, locked onto hers. The shock that registered there was profound, followed swiftly by a wave of something else. Anguish, guilt, and a flicker of desperate hope. It was not the reaction of a man who had set a trap. It was the reaction of a drowning man seeing a rope. Before he could speak, a voice, sharp and cold as Chardade ice, cut through the air. What is she doing here? Seraphina emerged from behind a screen, her beauty as flawless and cold as carved marble. She was everything Isabelle was not, poised, perfectly dressed in elegant, unaffected clothes, her blonde hair a smooth sheet of gold. But her composure was a thin veneer. Her eyes, the color of a frozen lake, held a venomous hatred as they landed on Isabelle. I asked her here, a new voice rasped. An elder Alden stepped forward. He was the pack's chief physician, the man who had been her mentor. He looked ancient now, his face drawn with exhaustion and failure. I sent the letter, Kael. Forgive my insubordination, but our ways are not working. We are losing them. We are losing Liam. He gestured to the small boy. Kael's gaze never left Isabelle's. The internal war was visible on his face. Alpha pride warring with a leader's desperation. The boy in the bed whimpered, a trickle of blood-flecked foam appearing at his lips. Alpha, Alden pleaded softly. We have tried everything. Isabelle didn't wait for his permission. The child was dying. She moved forward, ignoring the hostile stares, kneeling beside the cot opposite Kael. Her fingers, gentle and sure, went to the boy's throat, checking his pulse. It was a frantic, fluttering bird beneath her touch. He's septic. The patterns are a sign of blood poisoning, she stated, her voice all business. She looked directly at Kael, her gaze flat and professional, devoid of the history that screamed between them. I need my bag from the car. And I need yarrow fresh if you have it, dried if you don't. And silver dust root. Now. For a heartbeat he just stared at her, this woman he had loved and ruined, now commanding him in his own hall. Kael, she said, her voice dropping, the use of his name a deliberate, sharp weapon. The boy dies in the next 10 minutes if you do nothing. Your choice. It was the final push. He gave a sharp single nod to a warrior by the door, who immediately ran for her car. He then turned his fierce gaze to Seraphina. Get her what she needs from the storeroom. Seraphina's face went white with fury. You cannot be serious. You would let this exile practice her poisons on our people? On a child. Is that an order you wish to refuse, Luna? Kael's voice was dangerously quiet, the alpha power in it making the very air vibrate. Several of the weaker wolves in the room instinctively bared their throats. Seraphina's perfect mask shattered for a single, revealing second, revealing the festering rage beneath. Without another word, she spun on her heel and strode from the hall. Isabelle ignored it all, her world narrowing to the failing body of the child. She looked at Kael, who was still kneeling, his large hand engulfing the boy's small one. You, she said, her voice cold and clear. I need you to hold him still. This is going to hurt. The world narrowed to the space between Isabelle's hands and the boy's seizing body. The hostile glares, Kael's overwhelming presence, Seraphina's venomous exit. It all faded into a dull roar. There was only the patient, the crisis, and the cure. Hold him, she repeated, her voice a low, steady command that brooked no argument. Kael's hands, which had moments before been a gentle comfort, became immovable restraints on the boy's small shoulders and legs. The trust in that action, the sheer desperate faith he was placing in her now, was a stone dropped into the chasm between them. Isabelle's bag was thrust into her hands. She worked with a frantic, precise grace, pulling out a rolled leather kit. The silver needles within glinted in the firelight. She didn't have the yarrow or silver dust root yet, but she could buy time. The boy's lungs were drowning. With swift, sure movements, she began inserting the needles at precise points along his chest and back, a technique to stimulate energy flow and relieve the fluid pressure. It was a human art, one the pack physicians would have scoffed at, but she had spent 3 years augmenting her supernatural knowledge with mortal medicine. A low, agonized groan escaped Liam's lips as one of the needles found its mark. Kael flinched, his grip tightening. He needs to expel the fluid, Isabelle said, not looking up. The needles will help his body fight. The herbs will purge the poison. Just then Seraphina returned, her posture rigid. She didn't hand the items to Isabelle directly, but placed the bundle of fresh yarrow and a small, carved box containing the precious silver dust root on the cot with a look of utter contempt. Isabelle snatched them up. Crushing the yarrow in her palm to release its sharp, clean scent, she mixed it with a pinch of the metallic-smelling silver dust root. She whispered an old incantation over the mixture, a plea for cleansing her grandmother had taught her, and pressed the poultice directly over the boy's heart, where the crimson patterns were darkest. For a moment nothing happened. The boy's labored breathing continued, the terrible sweet-rotten smell of the bloom clinging to him. Then Liam's back arched off the cot. A racking, violent cough tore through him, and a stream of dark, viscous fluid, streaked with crimson, spilled from his mouth. The foul scent intensified, then began to dissipate. The pulsing, vein-like patterns across his skin faded from a violent, glowing red to a dull, bruised pink. His breathing evened out, deepening into the rhythm of exhausted sleep. A collective, stunned exhale swept through the hall. Isabelle sat back on her heels, her own body trembling with adrenaline and spent power. She wiped her brow with the back of her hand, finally meeting Kael's gaze. The raw, unguarded awe she saw there was more disorienting than any hatred. Alden rushed forward, checking the boy's pulse. Stable, he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. By the moon, he's stable. He looked at Isabelle, his old eyes shining with tears. You did it. I've stalled it, she corrected him, her voice tired. I haven't cured it. This is a temporary reprieve. The blight is still in his blood. It will come back stronger unless we find the source. She stood, her legs unsteady, and addressed Kael directly, her tone all business. I need to see where it started. The first victim. The epicenter. I need to examine the land, the water source. This isn't a natural sickness. It's a corruption. Kael rose to his full height, the alpha mantle settling back onto his shoulders, but it was different now. He was looking at her not as an exile but as an asset. A partner. The first was a hunter. Ronan. He fell ill a month ago after patrolling the western ridge, near the old burial grounds, Kael said. He's in the next room. He's not improving. Take me to him, Isabelle said, gathering her bag. Absolutely not. Seraphina stepped forward, blocking their path. Her composure was back, a sheet of ice over a raging river. She has proven nothing. A single lucky intervention does not erase her past crimes. We do not know what she just did to that child. She could be poisoning him slowly, ingratiating herself to destroy us all over again. The child is alive, Seraphina. Kael's voice was low, but it carried a finality that silenced the murmurs in the room. Which is more than any of us could accomplish. She stays. She investigates. That is my command. The word command hung in the air, a stark reminder of his authority. Seraphina's eyes narrowed, the hatred in them so pure it was a physical force. She looked from Kael to Isabelle and a cold, calculating smile touched her lips. As you wish, my alpha, she said, her voice dripping with false deference. But the pack will not soon forget that you chose the word of an exiled traitor over the counsel of your chosen Luna. She swept from the room, leaving a chilling silence in her wake. Kael led Isabelle to a smaller, darker room where a massive wolf, Ronan, lay in his human form. The crimson bloom had ravaged him. The patterns were blackened in places, his skin cracked and oozing a dark sap. He was unconscious, his breath a faint rattle. Isabelle's stomach turned. This was the bloom's endgame. Total systemic failure. He was found like this? She asked, her professional detachment the only thing holding her horror at bay. No, Kael's voice was gravelly. It started with a fever, then the marks appeared. They spread, and then he began to change. Change how? His wolf. It became aggressive. Feral. He attacked his own brother before he collapsed into this state. Kael ran a hand over his face, the weight of every loss etched into the new lines there. It's happening to others too. The bloom doesn't just kill them. It turns them against each other first. A cold dread trickled down Isabelle's spine. A sickness that physically corrupted and turned pack members feral? This was beyond any pathogen she had ever studied. This was weaponized. I need to go to the Western Ridge. Now, she insisted. It's almost nightfall. The woods are not safe, Kael argued. Rogues have been scenting our weakness, pressing the borders. The answers are there, she said, turning to face him fully. For the first time since her return, the professional mask slipped, and the old pain flashed in her eyes. You begged me to come back, Kael. This is why. You don't get to tell me how to do my job. Not again. The direct hit landed. He flinched, the guilt and shame she'd wanted to see finally raw and exposed on his face. Then I'm coming with you, he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. As they turned to leave, Alden approached Isabelle, his expression grave. There is one more thing, healer, he said quietly, his eyes darting towards Kael. The bloom, it does not affect everyone equally. It seems to target those with a weaker connection to the alpha. Isabelle froze. She looked from Alden's significant stare to Kael's suddenly shuttered expression. A sickness that preyed on the pack's dissidents, the discontent, those who might not fully support their alpha? A sickness that conveniently turned them feral, eliminating them as a threat? Her blood ran cold. This was no natural blight. This was an assassination. And all the evidence, she realized with a sinking heart, was pointing directly at the one person who stood to gain from a weakened, more pliable alpha and the removal of his rivals. The silence in the forest was a living thing, heavy and watchful. Isabelle walked a pace behind Kael, the crunch of their boots on the frozen undergrowth the only sound. The accusation Alden had planted in her mind was a poison seed, sprouting tendrils of doubt that wrapped around her heart. A sickness that targets those with a weaker connection to the alpha. Was Kael capable of such a monstrous act? The man she had loved would never have been. But the alpha who had coldly exiled her to secure his own power, she was no longer sure. The burial grounds are just ahead, Kael said, his voice low, cutting through her turbulent thoughts. He hadn't spoken since they'd left the manor, the tension between them a thick, unbreachable wall. The Western Ridge was a place of ancient power. The air grew colder and the ancient pines seemed to lean in, listening. It was here that the pack's founders were buried, their bones feeding the soil, their spirits woven into the territory's magic. Or so the legends said. As they broke into a small clearing, Isabelle stopped dead. The heart of the sacred grove was desecrated. In the center, where the oldest, most revered standing stone should have been, was a gaping hole. The earth around it was blackened and barren, and from it sprouted a single grotesque plant. It stood waist-high, its stem a sickly, pulsating crimson, its leaves a glossy, poisonous black. At its crown bloomed a single fleshy flower, its petals the same horrific scarlet as the patterns on the sick wolves. It pulsed with a faint, malevolent light, and the cloying, sweet-rotten scent of the crimson bloom was so strong here it made her eyes water. "By the moon," Kael breathed, his face a mask of horror and fury. "What is this?" "This is your blight," Isabelle said, her voice trembling not with fear but with a cold, clarifying rage. She pointed to the base of the plant. Scattered around it were small, personal items. A lock of hair, a carved token, a scrap of cloth. "It's a blood witch's focus. Someone is feeding it connections to the pack." She knelt, careful not to touch the blighted soil, and her eyes fell on one of the tokens. It was a small, whittled wolf, its style unmistakable. Ronan, the first victim, was a skilled carver. He'd often made toys for the pack's children. Her gaze swept the area, the healer and the investigator in her merging into one. She saw the faint impressions in the soil, a path leading from the blight towards a cluster of thick brambles. Moving toward it, she pushed the thorny branches aside. Hidden behind them was a small, shallow pit. And in the pit she found the proof. Empty vials that smelled of refined wolfsbane and dark magic. And buried beneath them, a bundle of herbs wrapped in a cloth. She picked it up, her blood running cold. It was a specific complex blend used for one purpose and one purpose only: to suppress an alpha's power, to make him seem weak, unstable. To turn the pack's loyalty. She stood, turning slowly to face Kael, the bundle held out in her shaking hand. "This is how it started," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "This is the real poison. This wasn't aimed at the pack, Kael. It was aimed at you." Kael stared at the herbs, comprehension dawning in his stormy eyes, followed by a dawning, terrifying realization. "The descent, the challenges to my authority these past few months. I thought it was just fear of the sickness. It was manufactured," Isabelle stated. "Someone was weakening you, making the pack lose faith. And then," she gestured to the horrific flower. "They created this. A sickness that would target those who were already disloyal, who were questioning you. It's a purge, Kael. They make you look weak, then they eliminate your opposition with a plague and they come out looking like the savior." The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. The person who would benefit from a weakened alpha and a cold, more loyal pack. The person with the knowledge of herbs and the ruthlessness to use them. The person who had protested Isabelle's return the loudest. "Seraphina," Kael whispered, the name a curse. A sharp, slow clapping sound echoed through the clearing. "Very good, healer. I knew bringing you back would be illuminating." Seraphina stepped out from behind a large pine, her face a mask of cold triumph. She was not alone. 2 large pack enforcers, their eyes glazed and obedient, flanked her. In her hand she held a long silver dagger, its blade stained with the same crimson sap as the blight. "You did all the work for me," she continued, her smile a predatory slash. "You confirmed the pack's instability. You revealed the source of the blight. And now you've led my dear trusting mate right to the scene of his greatest failure." She gestured with the dagger towards the blighted plant. "When they find your bodies here, it will be clear. The unstable alpha, in a fit of paranoia, killed the returning healer when she discovered his dark secret, that he was the one cultivating the crimson bloom to kill his rivals. And then, in his grief and madness, he took his own life." Isabelle's heart hammered against her ribs. It was the perfect trap. They were isolated. The pack was primed to believe it. "The pack will never believe that," Kael growled, stepping in front of Isabelle, his body tensing for a fight. "Won't they?" Seraphina laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "The exiled healer he was once obsessed with? The one he secretly pined for even after mating me? They'll see a tragic story of an alpha broken by a forbidden love and his own ambition. They'll be relieved when I take control and end the plague." She raised the dagger, the crimson sap on the blade beginning to glow. "And the best part? The final ingredient for the bloom's ultimate cleansing purge is the blood of the alpha who spawned the corruption. Your death, my love, will be the thing that finally cures our pack. Poetic, don't you think?" The two enforcers shifted, their bones cracking as they began their transformation into monstrous half-wolf forms, their glowing eyes fixed on Kael. Isabelle was unarmed. Kael was outnumbered. And Seraphina held a weapon steeped in a magic designed to kill him. They were not going to make it out of this clearing alive. Kael moved with the speed of a striking cobra. He didn't wait for the corrupted enforcers to complete their transformation. As the first one lunged, he met the charge head-on, his own body shifting in a blur of motion. His hands became weapons, deflecting razor-sharp claws with forearms now corded with dense muscle. The sound of impact was like stone meeting stone. Isabelle's mind raced, her training taking over. She was no warrior, but she understood anatomy. She understood weakness. As the second enforcer focused on Kael's flank, she didn't retreat. She moved. "Kael, the knee. Their coordination is off," she shouted, her voice cutting through the snarls. He didn't question her. As the first enforcer lunged again, Kael dropped low and swept its legs, aiming precisely for the joint she'd indicated. The beast howled, not in pain but in confusion, its movements becoming even more uncoordinated. Seraphina's smile faltered. "Kill the healer first. She's the real threat." The command shifted the enforcer's focus. The one Kael had just unbalanced scrambled toward Isabelle, its glazed eyes locking onto her. Time seemed to slow. She saw the drool dripping from its fangs, smelled the corrupting magic on its breath. This was it. But Kael was faster. He moved between them, taking the full force of the enforcer's charge on his chest. Claws ripped through his shirt, drawing blood, but he didn't falter. He grabbed the beast by its throat and slammed it into the ground with earth-shaking force. "The flower, Isabelle. Can you destroy it?" he grunted, holding down the thrashing enforcer while keeping watch on the second. Isabelle's eyes darted to the pulsating crimson bloom. Its light seemed to beat in time with the enforcer's movements. "I think so. But I need time." "That's what I'm here for," Kael growled, his eyes flashing completely gold now. Alpha power radiated from him in visible waves, pressing down on the corrupted wolves. They slowed, fighting against his will as much as they fought against his body. Seraphina watched, her composure finally cracking. "You can't hold them forever, my love. The corruption runs too deep." Isabelle didn't wait to see if she was right. She scrambled toward the blighted plant, her healer's bag still slung across her shoulder. Inside were her tools, silver needles, herbs, tinctures. But this wasn't a patient to be healed. This was an infection to be burned out. Her hands shook as she rummaged through the bag. What would work? Silver was for purification, but this was beyond simple cleansing. Wolfsbane could kill a wolf, but this wasn't a wolf. It was something else, something ancient and dark. Then her fingers closed around a small, crystalline vial. Moon-blessed water, collected during the last lunar eclipse. It was her most precious ingredient, saved for the most desperate of healings. As she pulled it out, Seraphina's eyes widened. "No. Don't you dare." The second enforcer broke free of Kael's mental grip and charged straight for Isabelle. "Isabelle!" Kael roared, throwing the first enforcer aside and leaping to intercept the second. They met in mid-air, a collision of flesh and fury that sent them both tumbling across the clearing. Kael ended up on top, his transformed face a mask of primal rage as he pinned the thrashing beast. "Do it now," he screamed, his voice barely human. Isabelle didn't hesitate. She uncorked the vial and poured the shimmering moon-blessed water directly onto the crimson bloom's roots. The effect was immediate and violent. The plant shrieked, an actual audible sound that tore through the clearing. Its crimson light flared blindingly bright, then began to flicker. The enforcers howled in sync, clutching their heads as the controlling magic wavered. But it wasn't enough. The bloom was wounded but not destroyed. It thrashed wildly, its roots digging deeper into the blighted soil as if seeking more power. "It's not working," Isabelle cried, watching in horror as the plant began to recover. "It's too strong." Seraphina laughed, the sound etched with hysteria. "You see, you can't win. The bloom is part of this land now. It's part of me." Kael looked from the recovering plant to Isabelle, to the still corrupted enforcers, to Seraphina's triumphant face. His eyes held hers for a long moment, and in them, Isabelle saw a decision being made. A terrible final decision. "No," she whispered, understanding dawning. "Kael, don't dash." But it was too late. He rose from the pinned enforcer and walked toward Seraphina, his transformation receding, leaving him completely vulnerable. "You want alpha blood?" he said, his voice strangely calm. "You can have it." Before anyone could react, he grabbed the silver dagger from Seraphina's hand and plunged it into his own chest. "Kael!" Isabelle screamed, scrambling toward him as he fell to his knees. But he wasn't dying. The blood that flowed from his wound wasn't normal blood. It shimmered with golden light, the pure, unconquered power of the true alpha. As it hit the ground, the crimson bloom began to smoke and wither, its connection to the land severed at last. The enforcers collapsed, the red fading from their eyes completely. Seraphina stared in horror as her creation died before her eyes. Kael looked up at Isabelle, his face pale but determined. "Now," he whispered. "Finish it." The bloom was weakened, dying but not gone. And Isabelle finally understood what she had to do. This wasn't about destroying the plant, it was about healing the land. She took the dagger from Kael's hand, now coated in his glowing blood, and plunged it into the heart of the withering bloom. "By blood and bond," she whispered, the words coming to her from some deep ancient place within. "What was corrupted I cleanse. What was poisoned I purify." A wave of pure, clean energy exploded outward, washing over the clearing, through the forest, across the entire territory. In the manor, every sick wolf gasped as the crimson patterns vanished from their skin. In the clearing, the bloom turned to ash. The enforcers woke, confused but clear-eyed. And Seraphina simply faded, her power broken along with her creation. Isabelle collapsed beside Kael, pressing her hands to his wound. "You idiot," she sobbed, her healing magic already flowing into him. "You glorious, stupid idiot." He managed a weak smile, his hand coming up to touch her face. Had to break her connection to the land. Only way. As she healed him, she felt it, a new bond forming between them, stronger than before. Not just mate and mate, but alpha and healer, two halves of a whole that could never be broken again. The battle was won. But as Isabelle looked at the ashes of the bloom and the fading mark where Seraphina had been, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The return to Stonehaven was a somber procession. Kael leaned heavily on Isabelle, his face pale but his steps steady. The two enforcers, Jax and Rorik, walked behind them, their heads bowed in a mixture of shame and confusion. They remembered their actions under the bloom's influence with the clarity of a nightmare. The forest itself seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, the oppressive cloying scent of the crimson bloom replaced by the clean, sharp aroma of pine and damp earth. They emerged from the tree line to find a crowd had gathered on the manor's steps. Alden stood at the forefront, his weathered face tight with anxiety. Gasps rippled through the pack as they took in the scene. Their alpha wounded and supported by the exiled healer, their two trusted enforcers looking like chastened pups, and the notable absence of their Luna. "Alpha." Alden rushed forward, his eyes scanning Kael's blood-stained tunic. "What happened? Where is Seraphina?" Kael straightened his shoulders, pushing away from Isabelle to stand on his own power. The effort was visible, but the authority in his voice was undiminished. "Seraphina is gone," he announced, his voice carrying over the murmuring crowd. "She was the architect of the Crimson Bloom. She used dark magic to poison our land and our pack, seeking to seize control." A stunned silence fell, broken only by the crackle of torches. "It's a lie," a voice shouted from the crowd. A burly warrior named Gregor, one of Seraphina's most vocal supporters, stepped forward. "You've been unstable for months, Kael. Now you return without our Luna and accuse her of treason? This is the exile's doing." He pointed an accusing finger at Isabelle. "She has poisoned your mind along with our pack." Isabelle felt the weight of their suspicion, a familiar, crushing feeling. She said nothing, merely meeting Gregor's glare with a steady gaze. It was Kael's fight now. "The proof is in the Western Grove." Kael's voice was like iron, his alpha power pressing down, demanding submission. "The desecrated burial ground. The Blood Witch's focus. The herbs she used to suppress my power and turn you all against me." He gestured to Jax and Rorik. "She used the bloom to control their minds, to force them to attack their own alpha. Ask them." Jax stepped forward, his voice rough with guilt. "It's true. I could feel her, a presence in my head twisting my will. The alpha fought to subdue us, not to kill us. He saved us from her control." Gregor scoffed, but the certainty in his stance wavered. The pack looked between their wounded alpha, their shamed enforcers, and the space where their Luna should have been. The narrative was collapsing, but old loyalties died hard. And how was this? Blight cleansed? Gregor challenged, his eyes narrowing at Isabelle. With more of her human tricks? Kael took a step forward, his movement causing a fresh stain of blood to bloom on his shirt. It was cleansed, he said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet. With the blood of your alpha. A sacrifice I would make again for every single one of you. A sacrifice I would have been unable to make if the pack's true healer had not been here to ensure I lived through it. His gaze swept over the assembled wolves, and this time, it held not just command but a raw, undeniable truth. Isabelle did not just return to save you from the sickness. She returned to save this pack from a traitor. She uncovered the conspiracy I was too blind to see. She has more than earned the right to be called our healer. The fight seemed to drain out of Gregor. He looked at Kael's wound, at the unwavering stand of the enforcers, and finally at Isabelle. He gave a stiff, reluctant nod and melted back into the crowd. The tension broke. The pack's attention shifted from accusation to concern, warriors moving forward to support their alpha, others looking at Isabelle with new, uncertain respect. As Kael was helped inside, he paused beside Isabelle. The healing chambers, he said to her quietly. Take charge. They will listen to you now. Isabelle nodded, the weight of the circlet she didn't yet physically wear settling upon her brow. She watched him be led away, then turned to face the pack. Dozens of eyes watched her, waiting. The bloom is gone, but its effects linger, she announced, her voice clear and carrying the confidence of her craft. The sick will be weak. Their systems need to be purged of the residual toxins. I need yarrow, dandelion root, and clean water. No. Everyone with medical training with me. There was a moment of hesitation, and then one by one the pack's junior physicians and healers moved to follow her. It was not a triumphant return, not a joyous celebration. It was a quiet, hard-won acceptance. She had proven her worth not with words but with action. The path to reclaiming her place was paved with duty, and she would walk it one step at a time. Later that night, the great hall had been transformed back into a place of healing, but the mood was hopeful. The air was filled with the scent of cleansing herbs instead of death. Isabelle moved between cots, checking pulses, administering remedies, her movements efficient and sure. Alden approached her as she finished changing the bandage on young Liam's chest. The boy was sleeping peacefully, the last traces of the crimson patterns gone. You were right to call me back, Alden, she said softly, not looking up from her work. I never doubted you, my dear, the old healer replied. Only the pack's ability to see what was in front of them. He paused. He asked for you. He's resting in his chambers, but he's in pain. The wound, it resists my usual poultices. Isabelle's head snapped up. A wound that resisted healing? That was the lingering touch of dark magic. She finished with Liam and gathered her kit. I'll see to him. She walked the familiar corridors to the Alpha's wing, her heart a conflicted drum in her chest. She pushed open the door to his chambers to find him propped up in his large bed, his torso bare and bandaged. The room was lit by a single fire, shadows dancing across the stark plains of his face. He was awake, his stormy eyes tracking her as she entered. Alden said you were in pain, she said, her tone professional, closing the door behind her. It burns, he admitted, his voice strained. Like the bloom's poison is still in my blood. Isabelle moved to his side, setting her bag down. She began to carefully unwrap the bandage. The dagger was coated in the bloom's essence. It's not a physical poison anymore, but a magical one. It's fighting your natural healing. As the bandage fell away, she saw it. The wound itself was clean, but the skin around it was traced with faint, spider-thin lines of crimson, a ghost of the blight he had sacrificed himself to destroy. Her breath caught. Kael. Can you heal it? He asked, his gaze intense on her face. Isabelle reached for a jar of salve, her fingers trembling slightly. I can try. As she applied the cool balm to his feverish skin, her fingers brushing against the solid muscle of his chest, the professional distance she had fought to maintain began to crumble. The memory of him throwing himself in front of her, of him taking the dagger meant for her, replayed in her mind. You shouldn't have done it, she whispered, unable to meet his eyes. You could have died. I told you, he said, his voice equally quiet. I would do it again. For you. For this pack. His hand came up, covering hers where it rested on his chest, stilling her movements. His skin was hot. I failed you once, Isabelle. I will not fail you again. The touch sent a jolt through her. The walls of resentment, so carefully built over 3 long years, felt paper-thin in this quiet room, with the scent of his blood and her herbs mingling in the air. The past and the present collided, and the future hung uncertain between them. Isabelle's breath hitched as Kael's hand covered hers. The heat from his skin was unnatural, a fever born of corrupted magic, not infection. For a moment she allowed the contact, the simple, shocking warmth of it a brand through her carefully constructed composure. Then the healer in her reasserted itself. She gently pulled her hand away, her fingers returning to their work with a clinical focus she did not feel. The salve will cool the inflammation, she said, her voice deliberately even. But it's a temporary measure. The corruption is bound to you, Kael. It's not just in the wound, it's in your blood. In your connection to the pack. She finally met his gaze, and the raw vulnerability she saw there made her chest ache. The mighty alpha brought low not by a rival's fangs, but by a poisoned betrayal. What does that mean? He asked, his voice rough. It means the bloom was designed to sever bonds, she explained, dipping her fingers back into the salve. It severed the pack's bonds of loyalty, turning them against you. And when you stabbed yourself with its essence, you introduced that same severing magic directly into your own core. She applied the balm again, her touch firm. It's attacking the fundamental magic that makes you alpha. That's why it resists healing. Your own power is fighting itself. Kael closed his eyes, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Can it be cured? I don't know, she admitted, the truth a bitter pill. I've never seen anything like this. The texts I studied, they spoke of such things in theory. A poison that targets the soul ties of a leader. It was considered a myth. A weapon too cruel to exist. Seraphina always did have a flair for the dramatic, he said, a hollow, humorless laugh escaping him. The sound, so full of pain and regret, undid her completely. The professional mask shattered. Why, Kael? The question tore from her, 3 years of bottled-up agony giving it a sharp, broken edge. Why did you believe her? Why did you let her convince you I was a traitor? You knew me. You knew my heart. How could you think I would ever deliberately harm this pack? He flinched as if she'd struck him. The pain in his eyes now was sharper than any physical wound. I never believed it, he whispered, the confession ripped from the deepest, most guarded part of him. Not for a second. Isabelle froze, her hand stilling on his chest. The world tilted on its axis. What? I knew you were innocent, he said, his voice low and tortured. He opened his eyes, and the storm in them was a maelstrom of guilt and shame. From the moment she made the accusation, I knew it was a lie. A cold, terrible understanding began to dawn on Isabelle. Then, why? Because she gave me an ultimatum, he said, the words seeming to cost him a great effort. The Council of Alphas was pressuring me to form an alliance with her father's pack to secure our northern border. I refused. I had you. I had our bond. I thought my love for you was strength enough. He swallowed hard. But then she came to me. She had proof of your treachery, falsified records, a poisoned tincture with your signature, a witness she had coerced. She said if I did not publicly denounce you, exile you, and take her as my mate, she would take her evidence to the council. The punishment for a healer betraying her pack is death, Isabelle. Not just exile. Death. And her father's influence would have ensured the sentence was carried out. The room spun. Isabelle's legs felt weak. She stumbled back a step, her hand falling from his chest. All this time. All the hatred, the grief, the years of believing he had chosen power and a political match over her. It had all been a lie. You exiled me to save me? The words were a disbelieving breath. I thought I was protecting you. The raw anguish in his voice was a physical force. I thought if you were gone, if you hated me, you would be safe. You could build a life somewhere far from all this. This poison. I convinced myself your hatred was a price worth paying for your life. His jaw tightened, a tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. It was the worst decision I have ever made. I have lived these 3 years in a special kind of hell, Isabelle. Watching my pack suffer under Seraphina's influence, knowing the woman I loved was out there thinking I was a monster. The bond between us, it never broke for me. It just became a constant agonizing reminder of what I'd lost. Isabelle stared at him, her mind reeling. The foundation of her reality for the past 3 years had just been obliterated. He hadn't betrayed her. He had sacrificed himself for her. He had chosen to be the villain in her story to ensure she got to keep living it. The anger that had sustained her for so long evaporated, leaving behind a vast hollowed-out space that was quickly flooded with a torrent of other emotions: pity, grief, and a devastating reawakened tenderness. She moved back to the bedside, her movements slow as if in a dream. She didn't reach for the salve. Instead, her fingers of their own volition rose to his face, gently wiping away the tear. He shuddered at her touch, his eyes squeezing shut as if he couldn't bear the kindness. "You should have told me," she whispered, her own vision blurring. "We could have fought it together." "I was a coward," he breathed, leaning into her hand. "I was so afraid of losing you that I orchestrated the very thing I feared most." In that moment, the last of her resistance crumbled. The truth was a bomb more potent than any in her kit. The man she had loved was not a faithless monster. He was a flawed, proud, desperate man who had made a catastrophic mistake for what he believed was the right reason. The faint, crimson lines around his wound seemed to pulse, a reminder of the danger he was still in. A danger that was, in its own twisted way, a consequence of his love for her. "The severing magic," she said, her voice soft with a new, fierce determination. "It feeds on isolation, on broken bonds. We can't fight it with herbs and poultices alone." His eyes opened, searching hers. "Then how?" Isabelle took a deep breath, the plan forming in her mind as she spoke it. "We have to do the opposite of what it wants. We have to reinforce the bonds it's trying to destroy. Your bond to the pack, and your bond to me." She saw the hope flare in his eyes, so bright it was almost painful to behold. "What are you saying, Isabelle?" "I'm saying we fight your poison," she said, her voice gaining strength. "With us." The silence in the Alpha's chamber was heavy, thick with the weight of the truth that now lay bare between them. Isabelle's fingers still tingled from the touch of Kael's skin, from the devastating vulnerability in his eyes. The man who had exiled her had done it to save her. The knowledge was a seismic shift, rearranging the very bedrock of her pain into something more complex, more profound. "Reinforce the bonds," Kael repeated, his voice a low rumble. The hope in his eyes was a fragile, precious thing. "How?" Isabelle's mind raced, sifting through years of study, through half-remembered lore from the ancient text she'd devoured in her youth. The crimson bloom is a poison of isolation. It preys on doubt, on fractured loyalties, on broken trust. Its magic is one of severance. She met his gaze, her own resolve solidifying. "We must answer it with a magic of connection. Of union." She stood, pacing slowly before the hearth. "There's a ritual. An old one, predating the formal pack structures. It's not about dominance or power. It's about acknowledgement. It's about two forces choosing to stand as one willingly, and in doing so, creating a shield that darkness cannot penetrate." She stopped and turned to face him. "It's called the joining." Kael's brow furrowed. "I've never heard of it." "It's been forgotten," Isabelle said. "It was used by the first alphas and their mates before there were lunas and titles. It was a simple promise made before the moon and the pack, a vow to share strength and weakness, joy and sorrow. It makes the bond between alpha and mate a living, breathing shield for the entire pack." She gestured to the faint crimson lines spidering out from his wound. "That poison is trying to cut you off from your pack, from your own power. The joining would do the opposite. It would weave my strength, my spirit, directly into yours. We would face it together. Your fight would be my fight." The implications hung in the air. It was more intimate than a political mating, more profound than any physical union. It was a fusion of souls, a promise that would be etched into their very beings. "The risk," Kael said, his gaze intense. "If it fails, if the corruption is too strong, then it could consume us both," Isabelle finished softly. There was no point in hiding it. The severing magic could lash out, trying to break our newly forged connection. It could destroy us. He was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. "After everything I've done, why would you offer this? Why would you take such a risk for me?" Isabelle returned to the bedside, kneeling so their eyes were level. The last vestiges of her old bitterness had vanished, burned away by the searing truth. Because you were willing to die to cleanse this pack of the poison you thought was your fault. Because you spent 3 years living in a hell of your own making to keep me safe. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And because, despite all the pain, the bond never broke for me either. I just buried it. I was too angry to listen to it. But it was always there, Kael. A dull ache I could never heal. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of release. Of forgiveness. I am a healer. It is my purpose to mend what is broken. And you, Kael, Alpha of the Silvermane Pack, are not the only thing that has been broken for a long time. We both have. A shuddering breath escaped him. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb stroking away a falling tear. The touch was electric, a current of pure, untainted connection that seemed to push back against the cold dread of the corruption. I do not deserve this, he whispered. I do not deserve you. This isn't about deserve, she said, leaning into his touch. This is about what is necessary. This is about what is right. And it is about what we both want. She took a deep breath. So I ask you, Kael, will you join with me? Will you let me stand with you not just as your healer but as your partner and face this darkness as one? There were no more words. The answer was in his eyes, in the way his whole being seemed to focus on her, in the fierce, possessive love that blazed there, untempered by guilt or fear for the first time in years. Yes, he breathed the single word of vow. Now and always. The decision made, a new energy filled the room. Isabelle stood, her movements swift and purposeful. We'll need Alden. And we'll need to do it at the heart of the pack. In the Great Hall. The ritual draws strength from the presence of the wolves you lead. She left to find the elder, her heart pounding not with fear, but with a strange, soaring anticipation. She was no longer the exiled healer sneaking in through back corridors. She was walking back into the heart of her pack, to claim her destiny and save her alpha. When she returned with a solemn, understanding Alden, they found Kael on his feet, leaning against the bedpost, his face pale but his expression resolute. Together, the three of them made their way to the Great Hall. The pack had not dispersed. They were still there, talking in hushed tones, tending to the convalescing. As Kael, supported by Isabelle and Alden, entered the hall, a hush fell. All eyes turned to them, wide with curiosity and concern. Kael stopped in the center of the room, under the great wrought iron chandelier. He straightened, pushing away from Isabelle's support, standing on his own power as the alpha he was. Pack of Silvermane, he called out, his voice echoing in the vast space, weaker than usual but ringing with undeniable authority. You have been tested. You have been poisoned. Betrayed from within. His gaze swept over them. The physical blight is gone. But a darkness remains within me. A poison that seeks to sever me from you and from my own strength. Murmurs of alarm rippled through the crowd. There is a way to fight it, he continued, his eyes finding Isabelle's. An ancient way. It requires truth. It requires trust. And it requires the woman I should never have let go. He held out his hand to her. Isabelle has agreed to join with me. To bind her life, her spirit, and her strength to mine, and in doing so to ours. To create a shield for this pack that no darkness can break. A stunned silence greeted his words. The joining was a legend, a fairy tale told to pups. Isabelle stepped forward, taking his hand. Her voice, clear and sure, carried to every corner of the hall. The joining is a vow. A promise that the alpha does not stand alone. That his strength is the pack's strength and his weakness is shared by all. I make this vow willingly. I bind myself to Kael and through him to all of you. Alden stepped between them, his aged voice imbued with a ceremonial gravity. The ritual is simple but the commitment is eternal. It is a choice. Do you, Kael, Alpha of Silvermane, choose to share the burden of your leadership, the weight of your crown and the truth of your soul with this woman? Kael's eyes never left Isabelle's. I do. Alden turned to Isabelle. And do you, Isabelle, healer of Silvermane, choose to share your strength, your wisdom and the protection of your spirit with this alpha, to be his shield and his sanctuary? Isabelle felt the rightness of it settle deep in her bones. I do. Then by the old laws and by the power vested in the bonds of this pack, Alden intoned, let the joining begin. He produced a simple silver-rimmed bowl and a ceremonial dagger. He handed the dagger to Kael. Alpha, your blood. The symbol of your sacrifice and your life. Without hesitation, Kael drew the blade across his palm, letting his blood, still shimmering with a faint corrupted crimson, drip into the bowl. Alden took the dagger, cleaned it and handed it to Isabelle. "Healer, your blood. The symbol of your renewal and your commitment." Isabelle did the same, her dark red blood mingling with his in the bowl. Alden stirred the mixture with his finger, his voice rising in an ancient chant. As he chanted, the mingled blood in the bowl began to glow, a soft, pure gold that grew brighter and brighter, pushing back the shadows in the hall. He dipped his finger into the glowing liquid and drew a line down Kael's forehead, then did the same to Isabelle. The moment the golden blood touched her skin, Isabelle gasped. It was like a circuit completing. A torrent of power, love and sheer, unadulterated life flooded into her from Kael. She felt his alpha strength, vast and deep, but also his pain, his guilt, his unwavering devotion to her. She felt the pack bonds, hundreds of shimmering threads connecting him to every wolf in the room, and now they were connecting to her too. He was part of the web. And through the connection she felt the corruption. A snarling crimson knot of darkness wrapped around Kael's heart. But it was no longer just his fight. As the golden light of the joining enveloped them, flowing from their foreheads and wrapping them in a radiant aura, Isabelle focused all her will, all her healing power, all the love she had just reclaimed, and directed it at that dark knot. "You cannot have him," she thought, the command echoing through their newly forged bond. "We stand together. We are one. And you are not welcome here." The crimson lines on Kael's chest flared in a final desperate protest, and then they began to recede, dissolving under the relentless, purifying light of their union. The aftermath of the joining was not a gentle warmth, but a glorious, terrifying inferno. Isabelle felt as though every nerve ending had been stripped bare and rewired into a vast humming network. She could feel the steady, grounding thrum of Kael's heartbeat as if it were her own, a powerful drum anchoring her to the earth. But she could also feel the fainter, myriad pulses of the pack, the slow, deep rhythm of the elders, the quick, anxious flutter of the newly healed, the steady, vigilant beat of the warriors on patrol. It was a symphony of life, and she was now a central instrument, both listening and playing. For Kael, the effect was just as profound. The constant, burning agony of the corruption was gone, replaced by a cool, clear stream of Isabelle's healing energy flowing through him, reinforcing his own power. The faint crimson lines had vanished from his chest, leaving only a pale, silvery scar, a testament to his sacrifice and their victory. The oppressive weight of isolation had lifted. He could feel the pack's loyalty not as a distant, abstract concept, but as a tangible, humming current flowing back into him, stronger than ever before. He stood taller, the color returning to his face, his stormy eyes clear and focused. The pack watched them awestruck. The golden aura of the joining had faded, but a new visible energy crackled in the air between their alpha and their healer. They were no longer two separate entities, but two halves of a single formidable power. It was Alden who broke the reverent silence, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and foreboding. "The joining, it is done. A bond like this has not been seen for generations. It will make you stronger than any Alpha and Luna in living memory." He paused, his old eyes grave. But such power does not go unnoticed. It is a beacon in the supernatural world. The balance has shifted. Kael nodded, his senses now sharpened by the bond stretching out beyond the manor walls. "I can feel it. The forest is watching." He looked at Isabelle, a silent conversation passing between them in a flash of shared thought. "We have drawn attention." Before they could formulate a plan, the main doors of the great hall burst open. Marcus, Kael's second, stood framed in the doorway, his clothes torn, a bloody gash on his forehead. The scent of fresh blood and foreign wolf filled the room. "Alpha!" Marcus gasped, his chest heaving. "The border. The western pass. It's been breached." A jolt of alarm, sharp and shared, shot through both Kael and Isabelle. Through their bond, she felt his tactical mind snap into focus, assessing the threat. "By who?" "Rogues." Kael's voice was a low growl. "Worse," Marcus panted, his eyes wide. "It's the Nightfang pack. Led by Torin himself." A collective, fearful gasp went through the hall. The Nightfang pack were not mere rogues. They were a large, disciplined, and notoriously brutal pack from the northern wastes, led by an alpha as cunning as he was merciless. They had been a dormant threat for years, held at bay by the Silvermane's strength and the natural barrier of the mountains. Torin, Kael breathed, his hands clenching into fists. How many? A full war party. At least 30 warriors. They took out our sentry post in minutes. They're not scouting, Kael. They're invading. The timing was no coincidence. Seraphina's betrayal, the Crimson Bloom, the weakened pack, and now a direct invasion. It was a coordinated attack. He knew, Isabelle said, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. She looked at Kael, her thoughts flowing to him. Seraphina wasn't working alone. She was the opening move. This is the checkmate. Torin, Kael's thought echoed back, cold and certain. He supplied her with the dark magic. He weakened us from within, and now he's moving in for the kill. The pack looked to their alpha, their faces etched with fear. They were weary from sickness, their numbers depleted, their spirits only just beginning to mend. Kael's gaze swept over them and then settled on Isabelle. Through their bond he didn't project fear or doubt. He projected a steely, unshakable resolve and a question. Me. Isabelle's answer was not just in her mind, but in her very soul. She felt the pack's fear, but she also felt their burgeoning hope, their reliance on the new strength they represented. She was no longer just a healer who mended wounds after the fact. She was part of the shield. She stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Kael. Her voice when she spoke was calm, but it carried the new, undeniable authority of the joining, reaching every wolf in the hall. They think we are weak, she said, her eyes blazing with a fierce, protective light. They think the bloom has broken us. They are wrong. She looked at the frightened, the wounded, the weary. The bloom showed us our true enemy. The joining has shown us our true strength. We are not broken. We are forged anew. Her words were a spark on tinder. She felt their effect not just in the room but through the bond. A ripple of renewed determination moving through the pack, strengthening the threads that connected them all. Kael placed a hand on her shoulder, the gesture one of absolute partnership. Marcus, sound the battle horns. Every warrior to the armory. Every elder and pup to the inner sanctum. He turned his head, his voice dropping to a growl that promised violence. The Nightfangs want a war? They will find one. But they will not find a weakened pack. They will find an alpha and his bonded healer. And they will find a pack that has already survived hell and is ready to send them there. As the hall erupted into controlled chaos, warriors rushing to prepare, Kael and Isabelle stood firm. The first true test of their joining was not a quiet recovery, but a howling storm of blood and claws. And they would face it not as Alpha and Luna, but as one single, indomitable force. The peace was over. The war had begun. The air over Stonehaven turned to iron and ice. Battle horns, a sound not heard in generations, echoed through the valley, a grim counterpoint to the terrified howls of the young being ushered into the mountain's deep, protective sanctum. Isabelle stood beside Kael on the manor's front portico, watching the grim ballet of war preparations. The fear was a palpable taste in the back of her throat, but it was no longer a solitary terror. Through the bond she felt Kael's own fear, not for himself but for his pack, for her, and it was tempered by a granite-hard resolve. She wrapped that resolve around her own heart like armor. They will come through the western pass, Kael said, his voice low, his eyes scanning the tree line as if he could already see the enemy. It's the fastest route to the manor. We'll meet them in the blood meadow. He turned to her, his gaze intense. Isabelle, you should. Don't, she cut him off, her voice quiet but final. She met his eyes and through the bond she let him feel the absolute certainty there. I'm not hiding. My place is with you. Not behind you. A flicker of the old, protective instinct warred with the new reality in his eyes, and was extinguished. He gave a single sharp nod. Then you are my second front. Your power, the authority you wielded during the joining, use it. Break their lines. Shatter their will. I will handle Torin. The plan formed between them in a flash of shared understanding. He would be the spearhead, the unbreakable wall. She would be the earthquake that broke the ground beneath the enemy's feet. They moved to the Blood Meadow, a wide, grassy plain just beyond the manor where the soil was famously rich and dark. The Silvermane warriors formed a bristling line, their numbers feeling pitifully small against the stories of the Nightfang horde. The scent of their fear was sharp, but beneath it, Isabelle could feel a new thread, a thread of desperate, defiant hope anchored to her and Kael. They did not have to wait long. The night fangs emerged from the tree line like a tide of shadow and malice. They were bigger, their fur matted and scarred, their eyes glowing with a savage, hungry light. At their head stood Torin, a giant of a wolf in his hybrid form, covered in ritual scars and wielding a massive, serrated axe. His gaze swept over the Silvermane line with contempt, then locked onto Kael and Isabelle. Thornwood. Torin's voice was a guttural roar. You look improved. Pity. It will make your death more satisfying. His eyes slid to Isabelle, a cruel smile twisting his lips. And you brought a pet. Is this the healer horse Seraphina whined about? She said you were soft for her. A weakness. Kael didn't respond with words. A low, earth-shaking growl started deep in his chest, and the air around him shimmered with the heat of his transformation. He became a vision of primal fury, a wolf of storm gray and muscle, larger than any in his pack, his eyes burning with golden fire. Torin's smile widened. Good. With a roar, the Nightfang pack charged. The two fronts collided with a sound like a mountain breaking. Claws ripped, fangs snapped, and the air filled with the snarls of wolves and the screams of the wounded. Kael met Torin in the center of the chaos, a clash of titans that sent shockwaves through the fighting. Isabelle stood just behind the Silvermane line, her heart hammering. She was no frontline warrior. A dagger felt useless in her hand. But she had another weapon. She closed her eyes, blocking out the immediate horror. She reached for the joining, for the brilliant golden bond that connected her to Kael. She felt his immense strength, the brutal, focused dance of his combat. But she also felt the Silvermane warriors around her, their fatigue, their pain, their flickering courage. She reached deeper beyond her bond with Kael into the web of the pack itself. The hundreds of thin, shimmering threads that connected every wolf to their alpha and now to her. She poured her will into that web. Not a command of domination but one of reinforcement. A wave of pure, unwavering belief. You are not alone, she thought, the message flowing through the pack bonds like a current of lightning. Your alpha fights for you. I stand with you. We are Silvermane. We are one. The effect was instantaneous. A Silvermane warrior about to falter under a Nightfang's assault suddenly found a surge of renewed strength, parrying a killing blow and driving his attacker back. Another, whose courage was wavering, felt a sudden, inexplicable calm, his movements becoming precise and deadly. The Silvermane line, which should have buckled, held. Torin, locked in his duel with Kael, sensed the shift. His eyes darted to Isabelle, who stood with her eyes closed, a faint golden light emanating from her. The healer, he snarled, blocking a swipe from Kael's massive claws. She's the key. Kill the healer. Two Nightfang brutes broke from the fray and charged straight for Isabelle. Her eyes snapped open. This was not a time for reinforcement. It was a time for authority. She didn't raise her dagger. She took a step forward, planting her feet, and met the charge not with steel but with her will. Halt. The word was not a shout. It was a decree. It carried the full ancient weight of the joining, the authority of the Luna who was bound to the land and the Alpha. The two charging Nightfangs skidded to a stop as if they'd hit an invisible wall. Their eyes, once full of bloodlust, went wide with confusion and a dawning, instinctive fear. They tried to move, to lift their claws, but their bodies refused to obey. Isabelle took another step, her gaze sweeping over the immediate battlefield. Kneel. Like a wave crashing, every Nightfang wolf within 50 yards of her, a dozen of them, collapsed to the ground, their bodies forced into submission by a power they could not comprehend. They whined, throats exposed, utterly helpless. The sight sent a ripple of terror through the rest of the Nightfang pack. Their advance faltered. They were warriors, not magicians. This was a power beyond their understanding. The distraction was all Kael needed. With a final, monumental surge of strength, he broke through Torin's guard. His jaws, capable of snapping bone, closed around the Nightfang Alpha's throat. There was a sickening crunch, and the light died in Torin's eyes. Kael threw back his head, the body of his rival falling to the ground, and let out a victorious, earth-shaking howl that was part triumph, part grief for the losses of his pack. The sound broke the remaining Nightfang resolve. Seeing their alpha dead and their comrades magically subdued, they turned and fled, melting back into the forest from whence they came. Silence descended on the blood meadow, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the heavy panting of the survivors. The battle was over. They had won. Isabelle's legs gave way, the immense effort of wielding the joining's power finally crashing down on her. But she never hit the ground. Kael was there, his massive wolf form shrinking back to his human one, his arms catching her, holding her tight against his chest, which was heaving with exertion and splattered with blood, both his and his enemies'. He looked down at her, his eyes no longer those of a furious warrior, but of a man witnessing a miracle. Isabelle. She managed a weak, exhausted smile, her hand coming up to his bloody cheek. Told you. I wasn't a weakness. He crushed her to him, his face buried in her hair. You, he breathed, his voice thick with emotion, are our greatest strength. Around them, the Silvermane pack began to gather, their eyes fixed on the pair standing amidst the evidence of their victory. They saw their alpha, bloodied but unbowed. And they saw their healer, the woman they had once exiled, who had just saved them all, not with a blade, but with a power born of unity and love. One wolf, then another, and then the entire pack sank to one knee, bowing their heads not just to their alpha but to her. To their Luna. It was not a title given by ceremony, but one earned in blood and sealed by magic. Isabelle, held safe in Kael's arms, finally felt it, the last piece of her shattered life clicking into place. The exile was over. The healing was complete. She was home. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe.